Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're taking a look at Thomas Schelling's ideas on how the world actually fights. We're breaking down a concept called the diplomacy of violence. And man, it's a wild look at how warfare completely shifted from just, breaking things to these incredibly intense psychological mind games. So, think about this. What if the absolute best weapon is the one you never actually fire? It sounds like a total paradox, right? I mean, forget the usual Hollywood picture of war with tanks and troops just smashing into each other. Schelling argues that modern war really isn't about winning battles at all. Actually, it's about scaring your opponent so badly that they just quit before a single shot is even fired.
That brings us to key idea number 1, smashing versus scaring. Basically, the two main ways we use force. Think of brute force kind of like a bulldozer. It just physically pushes a rock out of the way. The bulldozer obviously doesn't care what the rock wants. Or say someone wants your wallet. Brute force is them just physically tackling you to take it. But the power to hurt? That's a totally different beast. That's about coercing someone so they actually choose to hand over the wallet just to avoid getting tackled in the first place. You see the difference? You're not fighting their physical strength anymore. You're completely messing with their motives.
Moving on to key idea 2, the art of the threat. This is all about holding the pain in reserve.
So this operates on some really counterintuitive logic that Schelling calls the toxic bargain. See, brute force works when you actively use it. But the power to hurt? That only works when you don't use it. Literally, the second you pull the trigger, you lose absolutely all of your leverage. It's called toxic because for it to work, enemies actually have to share a tiny shred of common ground, which is usually just, wanting to stay alive. And honestly, we see this every single day. Think about it. We don't build physical walls around every single person to stop crime. Instead, we use the threat of going to jail to make them behave. Now, for this all set up to actually work, you've got to follow two main rules. Rule 1, they absolutely have to see the threat coming. And Rule 2, they need a crystal clear way out. It's kind of like two aggressive drivers playing a game of chicken on the highway. For you to win, the other guy has to actually see your car hurtling toward it, right? And crucially, he needs enough physical room to slam on the brakes. If he can't see you, or if he has literally nowhere to swerve, well, you just crash. The takeaway here, you always have to leave them an escape route.
Which leads us right into key idea 3, 3 stages of war, and exactly how warfare mutated over time.
Let's rewind a bit. Back around 1648, war was basically the sport of kings. You had these relatively small mercenary armies fighting it out while everyday civilians were pretty much left alone. But then, fast forward to the 1800s, and suddenly whole nations are mobilizing. Civilian suffering actually became a calculated tool to break a country's willpower. And then we hit 1945, the dawn of the nuclear age. This is where things get incredibly dirty, because civilians aren't just accidental collateral damage anymore. No, they become the primary instantaneous targets.
To be fair, though, targeting civilians wasn't entirely a new invention. Just look at General William T. Sherman during the American Civil War. His famous philosophy was to make it terrible beyond endurance. He wasn't just out there fighting Confederate armies. He was deliberately inflicting massive, unbearable pain on the civilian population, banking on the fact that they would eventually force their own leaders to just surrender. I mean, that right there is textbook coercive violence.
All right, let's jump into key idea 4, the nuclear game changer, or bypassing the military shield.
So, historically speaking, a country's military acted as a literal shield. You had to physically defeat an enemy's army before you could ever touch the society living behind them. But nukes completely flipped the script on this. Modern missiles just bypass that military shield altogether. Think about it. You can devastate an entire homeland on day 1 without fighting a single traditional battle. And honestly, the craziest part isn't even just the sheer size of these bombs, it's the speed. When you compress the total collapse of a nation into just a few hours, it means there is absolutely zero time left for politics or diplomacy or any kind of negotiation.
So realistically, how many frontline battles do you actually need to win today to completely crush a nation? The answer is 0. Nothing. Nada. That fact alone makes all those old military playbooks totally useless. The concept of winning a nuclear war basically means nothing now. Because if you have to completely destroy a country just to win, well, you haven't really won anything, have you? Ultimately, traditional victory is just no longer a requirement to severely hurt your enemy.
And that brings us to our final point, key idea 5, the new rules of peace. Basically, a massively high-stakes game of chicken.
So here is our somewhat grim modern reality. Peace today isn't actually about having the biggest, strongest defensive shield. Not really. Instead, it's this permanent, honestly terrifying psychological contest of nerve.
To survive in this environment, you actually have to look just crazy enough to pull the trigger, so your opponent gets scared and doesn't push you too far. You literally have to convince them that you will unleash unthinkable hell if they cross a certain line, even if doing so destroys you in the process. It is dark, for sure, but this diplomacy of violence is exactly what maintains our global balance of terror.
Which really leaves us with this final, incredibly heavy question. Does the constant threat of total destruction actually keep us safe? Like, if the power to hurt works best when you just threaten it, does holding a metaphorical gun to the world's head actually force us to be peaceful? Or are we all just hanging by a very thin thread of pure terror? It's definitely a lot to chew on, but once you understand this framework, it completely changes how you read the global news every single day. Anyway, thanks for hanging out and joining me for this explainer. I'll catch you guys next time.